So last episode, we took a little ride and we examined the idea of being able to identify our limiting beliefs, and we questioned whether we'd even know what our most limiting belief was. And it's an interesting thought. I think the limiting belief you don't know you have might be the most limiting because you're not even aware of it. It's an interesting concept. And I think it's been 2 weeks. I've thought about this idea of limiting beliefs. It's come up in conversations. I think it's worth revisiting that topic. So that's what we're going to do. And I also want to address or maybe look at finding limiting beliefs through the lenses of a few different books that I've read throughout the years. And I think they have really good insights on what we can do. So let's jump right in. So the first book that we talked about in the last episode was the book, The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz. And Don Miguel Ruiz has this wonderful concept within the Toltec wisdom about the book of law. And the book of law, just as a review, is mainly a metaphor for the collection of thoughts and beliefs that form your paradigm and basically color the lens in which you see the world. It's how you process things. It basically is all the business logic within your head. And a lot of that logic is formed by society. It's formed by your parents. It's formed by individual fears from your own experiences, right? And you go about your life living by these rules, living by these agreements and this understanding of how the world works. And sometimes it gets you places. Sometimes it keeps you imprisoned. And the idea or the intention in this episode is to take a deeper dive and really question where those limiting beliefs actually exist and maybe give a strategy on how to deal with those things. So in the book of law, we encourage looking at those beliefs and really challenging them. But even before we get to that, as mentioned in the last one, there needs to be some sort of practice that actually allows us to take note of what we believe. And what is that? There's a book that I read a long time ago. I think it was 2006. And it was one of the first books that I read front to back. And I couldn't wait to get back into the book. I remember reading it and literally having my mind blown. And that book was The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And there are plenty of things we can talk about when it comes to the power of now, the ego, the pain body. We can talk about mindfulness, but mindfulness as a whole is what we're going to talk about. And Eckhart Tolle really had emphasized, or Eckhart Tolle, however you want to pronounce it. I can't remember how he actually pronounces it, but really emphasizes the importance of living in the present moment, hence the name, The Power of Now. And by practicing mindfulness, you become more aware of your thoughts and your feelings. And that's the first step of identifying what those limiting beliefs are. And the question is, do I have to sit down and meditate in order to be mindful? And I would say no. I honestly would say no. I think that mindfulness comes in many fashions and many forms. Now, some sort of meditation practice definitely helps. It helps us be more aware of the inner workings in our inner world, which is the key to identifying those limiting beliefs. If we pay attention to the narration that goes on in our head, we start listening to these things objectively from the listener, the one that hears our internal thoughts, right? Not the one that thinks them, but the one that hears them. And if you start really identifying with the observer or the listener, in this case of the narration or the narrative that goes on in our head, we can detach ourselves from the content and we can honestly just observe. And that brings to mind the second topic that I wanted to bring up from The Power of Now, which is observation without judgment. As you notice your thoughts, and if you do so without criticism, this awareness will allow you to see how certain beliefs might be limiting you without immediately reacting to them. And that's important. And why is it important? It's almost like if you were following a squirrel, and the closer you get to the squirrel, the faster you move, the more movement, the faster it's going to run away. But if you are peaceful a lot of times that squirrel will come up to you. If you stand still, maybe you'll see where the squirrel goes to play or where it hides its food, or you'll tend to find out more about the behavior of that squirrel. I don't really know why the analogy of a squirrel came on, but the idea is when you pay attention, you can learn nature. And if you allow things to be without reacting to them, you most likely will get a fuller understanding of what those things are and really what they are by allowing it to be. And it's a hard thing to do. And if you see something you don't like, you cover it up. But if you wait and you listen to it, you might find some wisdom in it. You might see the pointers of where it's actually trying to get you. So going back to the 4 agreements, there was one thing that is important, which is to potentially start noting these things down. And the metaphorical book of law is cool to think of to just envision these things in our head. But I think what might be interesting is if we actually decide to write these things down in a book. For example, let's say you're going about your day and you've been practicing being mindful just in your day-to-day activities. You challenge yourself to listen to your thoughts and take note of anything that may cause fear in your day-to-day life. Fear of starting things, fear of achieving things, fear of asserting yourself, fear of stepping up to the plate, any of those fears, and you write those down. And you ask yourself, okay, why was I afraid? I was afraid to speak up at the meeting with the CEO because I didn't want to fumble with my words and look like an idiot. And then if you dig deeper a little bit with that, you may be like, oh, I feel nervous around people, my superiors, because whatever reason. And then the more you dig that, you start understanding why these things exist. And I think it's important to, if you don't have somebody facilitating an analysis or facilitating the digging, it's important to maybe write these things down, come back to them, ask yourself more questions about it, and really try to dig on your own. I'll share a personal experience with you that I actually had maybe, is it right around the turn of the year? I've been suffering some weird health issues. Nobody really knows what they are. But in that, I started looking at everything within my life. My stress levels, I started thinking about my health, my food. And I remembered one of my friends that I had met in the Chopra health course, I believe it was, the Ayurveda course that Chopra offers. And I remembered that he did EFT, emotional freedom tapping. And so I figured, you know what? I think I'm going to do this. And so I reached out to him, and little did I know he had actually started evolving his technique and learning, and I can't remember the name, but he said, hey, I've taken a little further, and just let's go ahead and try this and see how you like it. And so he did actually take it a lot further. If you're not familiar with EFT or emotional freedom technique or tapping, definitely look it up. There's plenty of stuff on the internet about it. And he added another dimension. And in that dimension of dialogue and analysis and examining certain things, we stated one of the issues that I wanted to address, which was stress at work. I felt extremely stressed out. I think I felt very stressed out in general. And when we were going through this process, and I'll get the name of exactly what the type of extra layer that he had added to the EFT. But when we went through this process, he got me into a nice little relaxed meditative state, and we acknowledged some of the stress and some of the stressors. And I went back, and he had me go back into my past self version and look at when I first felt those feelings, if I remember this correctly. And what I do remember about this is that I thought I understood where I would go and what I would find. To my surprise, what had popped up in this memory, right? What had been uncovered was not what I thought it was going to be. As a matter of fact, it was a memory of me in elementary school. And I remember this feeling of just there were many times when I, for the most part, was left very much alone. And when I mean left alone, left unsupervised for long periods of time. And I would effectively take myself to school, walk myself home, entertain myself, cook myself breakfast, dinner, and at a very young age. And I remember a general feeling of neglect. And the way I combated that was with doing well at school, because at least I would get attention and something close to affection from the teachers, and I'd get recognition. And what that morphed into was more or less I had to perform exceptionally in order to get some sort of acknowledgement. And that kind of, when I felt that and I understood where that feeling first originated, and I understood what I was telling myself as an elementary school kid, that unlocked a lot of things. I started looking after that at other patterns, right? And I also noticed, which was pretty interesting, that when I felt like I wasn't going to be the best at something, I gave up on it. And if I started telling myself that, yeah, I had to be the best in order for people to like me. And I couldn't accept being average at certain things. That's a heavy weight. And that's something you learn as a kid, and you don't have the healthy management of those thoughts. You really allow yourself to get into these weird places emotionally and mentally. And so when I realized that, and I went back to my younger self and I told my younger self that it's okay, like you're be good. And I forget all the things that I told myself, but it was a very transformative thing, because I'll tell you, in the last 6 months or 4 months, my stress levels have gone down tremendously. And it's interesting. It's really interesting. There's of course some other lifestyle changes that I made as well, but acknowledging a feeling that was if you think of like a building, right? And at the lower levels of that building, there's some really janky stuff going on. And you're starting to build stuff up top. And because this lower level supportive foundational structure is a little off, everything else is going to be a little off all the way up here. And until you gut that out, and that has to be done very carefully, right? Because you could break a whole bunch of stuff. But as soon as that's fixed, everything else that's built on top of it, one, may become more stable, but two, you might be able to unravel a whole bunch of stuff that was done incorrectly just to account for that. And it took me some time to really do and really start looking down that rabbit hole of decisions that I made and behaviors that I actually would partake in because that belief. And it's an interesting thing. And the beautiful thing within that process is that there was a planting of a new belief, that it was okay to not be the best. It was okay that you were already loved and appreciated and acknowledged. So I think that's a pretty interesting to try to identify those beliefs and remember to actively replace them with something else. And you may need to write affirmations. You may need to craft them specifically to counteract those things and to reaffirm that that belief is no longer needed. You could replace that with, I am worthy of love without conditions, and I can learn and grow in any area that I choose, which fundamentally gives us the okay to, in the belief that, hey, we don't have to have all these strings attached in order to be loved. And then also that we can grow. And it's okay not to be good in something, but that we can grow and that continue on this path and you will become better and you'll become better. And to ask questions. Yeah, that was the other thing. I feel like I felt a lot of stress at work because I felt like I was a little bit behind on certain skill levels. And I was afraid to ask questions because that would denote that I didn't know. And if I didn't know, then I would be frowned upon or whatever the case is. And that was a compounded issue. That was like, how do you get better at something if you can't ask for help, right? Really interesting. And if you start looking at how all these things play together, it's very easy to see that we start weaving a very tangled web. And it's only through the ability of being mindful and being able to observe what's happening, what's going on, do we get that power to identify, challenge, and then replace. And I think that's where some of the personal power type of stuff comes in, especially when reading the 48 Laws of Power. 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. If you read it, the first thing you're going to think is, like, wow, this is ruthless. And like the first time I read it, I hated what I was reading. But when it comes down to it, there's a lot of strategy in it. And in a lot of ways, when you understand that in a lot of places where you operate in, people are looking to have power over you. And if you're able to recognize those games, it helps you reclaim your power. Another thing is analyzing your beliefs, power dynamics, and for power dynamics. For example, if you can understand how power dynamics play out in self-limiting beliefs. For example, let's say if you believe that you always have to defer to somebody else to make a decision or to enable you to act on something, ask yourself whether that serves you or simply maintains somebody else's power. The other part of the book really just helps you empower yourself. So if you were to, let's say, start paying attention to how you are giving away your power, you can then strategically start building a sense of power by adopting beliefs that enhance your ability to act, right? So going back to the illustration or the example of what, like, you might be afraid to speak up because you're fumbling over your words, or you feel like your thoughts aren't as important because you're not a CEO or a VP or something like that. You are cutting yourself short from actually showing your best foot forward. What if that idea was the idea that led you to get promoted? What if that idea was the idea that helped completely reshape your work life? So if you, again, are able to replace those thoughts with belief that my voice is valuable and deserves to be heard, you're reclaiming your personal power. And all of this operates on the principle of mentalism from the Kabbalion. One of the most, again, the reason why the Kabbalion time over time comes back to me in the 7 Hermetic Principles is that, yes, you can breathe, you have all of these modalities in which you can transform yourself. You can use yoga, you can use capoeira, you can do all these things. But when it really comes down to it, if you have an equal balance between awareness, mindfulness, and a good relationship with how you use your mind, when you start using your mind as a tool rather than, or for example, I'm going to veer off a little bit in social media, for example. I use it for a number of reasons, mainly to market what I'm doing. Now, it's powerful and useful for those purposes, but it actually can start stealing away your personal power or your business power if it consumes you and it consumes all of your time. And the same thing is for, if you look at your mind, if your mind is constantly running, who's really in control? If you cannot stop your thought because you haven't exercised that muscle of mindfulness and awareness, then what's really in control? And so when we start using our mind as a tool, as a lens to focus, then we can start changing our external circumstances. The other thing about pretty much every single thing in the Hermetic Principles is aimed to help you reclaim your personal power. One thing that sticks out, though, is correspondence and vibration, right? As above, so below, as within, so without, all those things. And then everything vibrates. Nothing is at rest, right? When you align your thoughts with the kind of life and the kind of people that you want to be around, the life you want to live, ensuring that your beliefs resonate with your highest intentions, and that you keep people around who believe in you and who encourage you. Those limiting beliefs, as they may creep up, are bound to dissolve. That's huge, right? If you keep yourself around positive, optimistic, realistic people who are doing things and are doing the things that you want to do, you're more likely to achieve those goals. You're more likely to make those changes. And I think that's one of the beautiful things that I saw in the event, right? A lot of people are merging into where they want to be. And all of us are coming together to support each other and doing those things and spreading the word, right? The next thing, I wanted to talk about is the obstacle is the way. And, the really interesting thing here, is he presents Stoicism. And in the book, Ryan Holiday suggests that every obstacle presents you an opportunity to grow. So if you view your limiting beliefs as challenges to be overcome rather than immovable barriers, right? Adopting a growth mindset instead of a fixed mindset, then you will learn and grow. The other aspect or concept that the book brings out is action and adaptability. Should you take proactive steps to act against limiting beliefs? Of course. If you believe that you're not going to be good at something, then you can take small proactive steps to manage and build the skill out of it and build the confidence and stay at it. I can't help but think back again with capoeira. I feel like in the very beginning, when I look back, I cringe. But if you keep at it, you become good. You become better. You become great. I have a long way to go before I'm great, but you keep going. So when you start integrating all of these approaches, you get more or less a holistic path of recognizing and changing your limiting beliefs. Again, it takes deep self-reflection. It takes a readiness to adjust your internal narratives. It takes awareness of what those narratives are, and then an active commitment to personal growth. You have to want it. You have to discipline yourself. You have to challenge yourself to get out of your comfort zones. And the journey isn't always easy, but it definitely is worthwhile. And it will lead to a greater personal freedom and overall effectiveness in achieving the things that you want to achieve. The last thing that I wanted to bring out is one of the more trickier parts, and this is more so within the idea of the power of now. And we'll end on this because the video is getting pretty long. But the concept of ego, it's needed in a lot of cases, right? It represents the self or the part of the mind that mediates between conscious desires and the external world, right? And while it's essential for survival, in a lot of cases back in the day, like it gave you a group to identify with and to stick towards, and it helped you navigate social structures. But with that came a lot of limitations that can hinder personal growth. And ego and identity are definitely tricky areas. One of the ways that ego prevents growth is that narrow self-interest. It tends to prioritize its own needs and desires, and a lot of times that's at the expense of others. It can lead to selfish behaviors, lack of empathy, and ultimately create conflict. Then there's the resistance to change. This is how it is. This is always how it's been, because the identity is something established. And that's interesting because I am definitely about evolution, but then I'm also about maintaining tradition. And sometimes those can be at odds. And, the identity also this attachment to identity can and really be a challenging position to be in when you are trying to grow. If you identify with a bar or a group of people, and those group of people are operating at a vibration that's not where you want to be, it's going to be hard to let those go. And that ego of yours is going to challenge you, is really going to challenge you, make you feel bad, make you feel guilty for maybe leaving those things behind and those people. The other thing it can do is distort a self-image. And the distortion of self-image is really interesting because it can paint you a victim. It can lead to overconfidence, arrogance, unrealistic expectations. It can make you feel inadequate or have low self-esteem. It could be both extremes at the same time. And all of it leads to some form of dysfunction. And that is pretty tricky to navigate because those are all fundamental beliefs that are stacked upon the concept of ego. Another thing that it can present is attachment, again, to external factors like success, possessions, appearances, others' approval. We talked about that. This dependency, it makes happiness a very volatile state because it's always fleeting. And so when we look at our limiting belief, a lot of times they're baked into the story or narrative that we form about ourselves, which effectively becomes our ego. And it's that false image and that false narrative that we tell ourselves about who we are and what our relationship is in society, to our friends, to our workmates, to our children, to our parents, to our significant other. And it really can lead to brittle happiness. It can lead to emotional instability, depression, and always feeling like you're about to lose something because it's always at the will of other people or other things outside of your control. Another thing is just fear and defense mechanisms. When we operate out of ego is this made-up concept, of course, representing ourselves and our nature. And when an idea is challenged, right? When an idea is challenged, it's us trying to control other people's beliefs. And that's an interesting thing when you think about it, is we are trying to control beliefs. We're trying to control a belief that somebody else has about ourselves. And that's where this misplaced sense of limitation comes about, is that we can't really control what other people think. The only thing we can do is control what we think. Sure, you can, expend a lot of energy and effort into persuading somebody to think something. But again, you're relinquishing your personal power by focusing on other people, trying to build some sort of image up. And again, it can be changed at any moment. And then, of course, there's a barrier to mindfulness and inner peace. And lastly, leading to conflict and competition. And so I wanted to end on the note of the ego, because I think when we look at all these things, when we do the self-reflection, oftentimes our ego will trick us into not acknowledging certain things, certain behaviors. And I encourage you, as you go in, as you start doing an analysis and an examination, if you start writing these things down, these things that prevented you from stepping up or prevented you from jumping into some path in your life, really challenge and pay attention to the things where your mind may at the last second redirect you. Oftentimes, that's our ego trying to protect itself. So again, limiting beliefs. I think we dug a little bit deeper into why we might not know where our limiting beliefs or what our limiting beliefs might be. Because again, when we take into the consideration that from day one, we have been influenced in believing certain things and we might not be aware of them, or that we are self-imposing based on our own conclusions that we have come about. We have an experience, we form a belief, and we feel like that is how it is everywhere. It's not until we go back and really try to explore through mindfulness and through observation without judgment to where we identify and challenge those beliefs and replace them with new agreements and new statements through affirmations, do we start reclaiming and understanding where our power might be going, whether we're deferring to others or whether we're striving to empower ourselves to be heard, to be seen, to act on, and to move, to motivate. And when we come to realize that this is all within our minds, These are all stories that we tell ourselves. Applying the principles of mentalism, correspondence, vibration, polarity, all of the 7 hermetic principles, and leaning into those obstacles, leaning into those areas that we shy away from, that we're afraid to acknowledge, maybe because of our ego. When we take action and allow ourselves to change and adapt, I think those are the ways that we can actually truly make long-lasting changes and overcome those limiting beliefs. So this is the end of this episode. If the last half seemed a little different from the first, it's because I ran out of space on my laptop and I had to delete a whole bunch of stuff. But I hope I was able to drive the point. And thank you for spending this time with me. Hopefully, we've uncovered some things and maybe inspired you to really take a deeper dive and looking at your own limiting beliefs. Thank you. And as always, like, subscribe, and comment if you found any of this material helpful. Thank you, and I'll see you soon.